not turn on. Otherwise, it will go to sleep and everyone will be sleeping.
Okay. Pues arrancamos. Pues muy buenos días a todas y a todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us during this last morning, our third day of these Camusian gatherings, the Trobades Camus, where along these 3 days we have tried to build this us, where Camus said, "I rebel, thus I am." This morning, we have 2 round tables devoted to a live art, 4 different ways to say that fraternity, it's something that we achieve with our bodies, words, voices, and by being present. This is why we shall begin with a conversation that has been going on between Sandy and Alessandro and the Art Collective, working between architecture, politics, and activism. And they pose a radical, important question. How do you inhabit a space when such a space has been denied to you? How do you build community when the material conditions make it impossible? Without a doubt, they will bring for us an exploration of the Camusian revolt in its community standpoint. Thank you very much, Sandy and Alessandro. You have the floor.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Sandra. Gracias a todos y a todas que habéis facilitado este encuentro. Para nosotros, durante estos 2 días nos hemos sentido muy a gusto y entusiasmados para conversar, porque normalmente se nos invita a dar una presentación juntos y pensamos que este reto, pues ¿por qué no, no? Hablar con vosotros, no tanto de nuestros proyectos, porque si os interesa conocer mucho más acerca de nuestros proyectos, podéis consultar nuestra página web, donde tenemos un importante archivo. Y vamos a enseñaros algunas imágenes, porque lo que queremos hoy es debatir. Y me planteaba que me gustaría empezar con la presentación de quiénes somos y cómo empezamos a trabajar con...
So, I am Sandy Hilal. I was born and raised in Palestine, Bet Sahur. Bet Sahur is a small town south of Bethlehem that was actually well known for what was called the White Intifada during the first Intifada. And I definitely came from a situation or was formed in a situation where I saw my community, my people, my father, mother, grandparents, sort of in a second when Israelis decided that it was so dangerous actually to have more than 4 Palestinians coming together, and they closed schools, universities, whatever would bring us together. And therefore you will understand what does it mean to be together for a colonial project. In that sense, only us deciding to be together and organize ourselves together was seen as a very, very dangerous act of resistance. And indeed, you know what, I think I myself witnessed and be part of, that they were so worried about schools being closed that everybody in the neighborhood came and says, how many teachers do we have in the neighborhood? How many students do we have? How many empty living rooms and garages we have? And I saw a community in only 2 days setting up a school. And that experience, being part of that experience and understanding what does it mean to decide, and what actually does it mean, I have to say, when we speak about self-determination, in Arabic, self-determination is حق تقرير المصير, and that means is your right to decide your becoming. And in that sense, for me, the most simple act of people from Beit Sahur bringing 18 cows to the city and deciding to produce our own milk, and Israelis decided to put us under curfew of 40 days because we decided to produce our own milk. And in that sense, they decided that these cows are very dangerous, and they began to follow them everywhere between living rooms. I mean, people hiding them in living rooms, in valleys, and actually witnessing that moment of simply asking to produce one own milk or to decide one own way of teaching the next generation. That is for me, when you hear Palestinians shouting for their right to self-determination, all what they are asking for is to be able to produce their own milk, to teach their own kids, and that is actually, I think, in our case, has maybe been one of the foundations of how we built our practice. And in that sense, I went to study in Italy. I studied architecture there. I met Alessandro, and then we proceed with our PhDs, and then decided to return back to Palestine when I was pregnant with our first daughter. I mean, we are both partners in life and in work, and we wanted to raise our daughters actually in an extended family. And so we decided to return back home. And again, like the school in the first Intifada, we thought, what do we have? We were two young PhDs, recently finished, and we didn't know from where to begin. And Europe felt so hard to begin from, because in that sense, all what we had in front of us is to be working either in a studio of architecture, or to the maximum being assistant teachers for so long, for 20, 30 years, until eventually we will become teachers at universities. And we decided, why not to go to Palestine? And actually we ourselves went there, and Palestinians normally built houses for their kids on top of their buildings. And my parents, because they thought that we will be living definitely in Europe, they only built one room and one living room for us on the roof of the house. So we had a huge terrace in front of our house. And we actually simply returned back there. We called ourselves Dar. We co-founded. We said, what are our resources? We have a terrace, big one, where we began. Weather in Palestine is amazing for 10 months a year. So we began to organize our own lectures, conversations. We called ourselves Dar. Dar means home in Arabic. My brother was not yet married, so we asked him to lend us his apartment, and we created a residency. So that is when you read Dar is decolonizing architecture, art, and residency. And that is why, because actually we decided to go to Palestine, so there was no way to avoid understanding what does it mean to decolonize, how our life would look like by living in Palestine and decolonizing our practice, understanding our practice in that sense. So decolonizing architecture, because we are architects, and we felt it's very important to continue with that. Also because architecture is one of these ways in which words can create forms, right? And create spaces and create potentialities. Art, because architecture was so conservative discipline, and in somehow we had to work only with powers most of the time if we want to be architects. And the art was our way to be rebellion within architectural sort of sphere. So bringing art and architecture has been absolutely very important for us. And then residency, because hospitality has been always at the center of our practice. So what does it mean indeed for us to be able always to create communities around us? And we always thought that spaces are essential in order to understand how do we create communities. It's not enough. If we are in a space that the community have hard time to grow, it will not grow easily. So we decided we would like to host people and bring them in Dar, in our practice. So this is a little bit who we are. And maybe, you know, I mean, to continue the conversation with Alessandro in some way, I think I want to ask you what brought you to Palestine, and in some way how that affected who you are and our practice.
I also would like to start by maybe acknowledging, first of all, how, especially at this time, we can still keep maybe seeing images if that is possible, because we are practitioners, so we tend to reflect on our practice. We are not theorizing from other people's work, but we are very much actually attached to our own practice, which is the possibility for us to understand and being in the world. Before answering to your questions, I also wanted to have a couple of acknowledgements. I mean, first is how difficult is to speak at this time, especially around what is happening in Palestine. Many times, you know, we, every time there is an invitation, you know, we have to think twice if, how to do it, you know, if to do it, if makes any sense to talk in a moment in which we feel, or at least I feel, that, that we failed. We failed, you know, to stop this killing machine. There were years in which maybe we had illusions that our work was tied to a bigger struggle. But in many days, we have the sense of having failed and how to deal with that defeat of, as we speak, we know that more families have been killed, not only in Palestine, you know, in Lebanon. The ambition of Israel is now reaching beyond Palestine. And in that sense, many times we feel that the ground on which we felt we were standing on is shaking, you know, or disappeared. So first, the acknowledgement of what you are going to try. Please see that as a way to attempt to continue to live in this world, you know, to continue to understand what is happening, but also with this deep sense of having failed and being defeated. But nevertheless, we also recognize that maybe we are also part of also a longer trajectory of resistance, you know, that, you know, from 1936, during the Arab Revolt, the first Intifada, 1987, the Arab Spring, 2011, you know, even the students' encampments of the last years. So these are also moments to acknowledge that many of us are not giving up and accepting the reality as it is, and we are still struggling to change. The second thing, maybe, I don't know if I want to answer to your questions, but the second thing I also wanted to say, that I wanted to take the invitation of Sandra to have conversations in a way that what you see, these are some of also the images that we usually use during our lectures, you know, but one of the things of the lectures that everything is planned. And in that case, we would like maybe also reflect on the days that we were with all of you and what we listened previously, and therefore maybe conversations among us, but most likely also a conversation also with all of you. And therefore taking the conversations maybe also as a way to produce knowledge, a way to also consider conversations maybe as important as could be, reading a book or watching a film or listening to prepared lectures. Also, maybe we will get a little bit distracted by those images, but I hope that as sometimes we are now able to do more one thing at the same time, the images also speaks about some of the projects that we are reflecting on. And I want to get to maybe to the point of our conversations that seems to me relevant in relation to the idea of these gatherings, which is also trying to reflect on a theme and trying to reflect, as it has been for these invitations, on specific concepts. And that's also something that is very close to the ways in which we work, which means that for us, every interventions, every architectural or artistic project is also a way to redefine the concepts as we know them. Because the acknowledgement, the second acknowledgement I want to make is that we are using colonial languages, right? Being English, the ones that we use, which is not our native language. My native language is Italian, but that is also a colonial language. Spanish is also a colonial language. And every colonial language, of course, comes with the package. We like it or not. So we use those concepts. And I think we have to, first of all, recognize that, that this language is very far, or I would say it's inherent certain form of violence that somehow we have to acknowledge. Yesterday, for example, was briefly touched about, that our own theme of the conversations, of course, it's complicated, and we have to try a way maybe to reframe those terms, and maybe also on one side criticizing them, on one side redefining them, but also trying to reflect on new vocabulary that we have to build. And this moment of conversations, maybe these are the moments in which we can open up our imagination to understand what are the new words that get a little bit closer to the experience that we feel in our bodies, to the experience that we feel in our everyday life, because many times these words looks like just inherited a little bit from the past. So come to the questions of what brought me in Palestine. I have maybe a very banal questions or answer, and I remember that the answer is simple. Is love, because I met Sandy in Venice, and when I went for the first time in Palestine, I didn't know much about it, in a sense that I was neither an activist nor a religious person, and therefore maybe I didn't have a specific way of looking at Palestine, because that also, on my experience over decades and more, is also the possibility of seeing Palestine for what is very difficult, because it's so mediated and filtered by structures that is very difficult to realize what is there. So in this case, for me, it was much more a learning experience. I would say that personally, learning has been always, there are sometimes some blacks, that's fine to have them too. Is the fact that reflecting on the Palestine as a way, and that coincide with my study in Venice. So we moved there, and then at that point, Palestine became what I used to say my real PhD on understanding how architecture is used for colonizations. Should I continue, or you want to? I have more things to say.
Yalla, go ahead.
Okay, okay. Yeah, maybe I also like to improvise on those images. Those images are related to one of our projects that we engaged in 2008 when one of the Israeli military camps was evacuated very close to our house, and was for the first time in which we also saw what happened when these colonial buildings are evacuated, how people reuse them. And for us, that was an image of decolonization, because there was a lot of discussions about should we reuse the military base as it was, or could be reused in a kind of different ways. So the day in which we were there with also Imad, which is the director of the Palestine Wildlife Associations, and he was explaining us that Oshograb, that was the name of this military base, was actually an incredible space for migration of the birds. So, and one of the problems, of course, as you also saw in these days, that the expansion of colonization is continuing, and many of these military bases are simply then turned into new Israeli settlements. So in this case, for us, architecture was more about how we transform the military base into a nest for birds that migrates from Europe towards Palestine down to Africa. So our interventions in this case was an interventions of continuing destroying these buildings, not restoring them, continuing to make holes, and then the holes will be the place in which birds can actually nest. And that question of decolonization, I guess, has been following us since we were there. What does it mean to decolonize in Palestine could be simply maybe stated as getting rid of the Israeli occupations, colonization, and apartheid. But in the moment we moved to Europe, or back to Europe, because for me also was a returning back, these questions, of course, change its meanings. What does it mean to decolonize is not the same. Because, from Europe, of course, you can be in solidarity with Palestine, but also there is a specific work that needs to be done when you are here with the institutions, with the colonial institutions that we Europeans inherited, such as universities, museums, exhibition spaces, the White Cube. All of those things, they are essentially modernist colonial expressions of how, let's say, in architecture, how the space should be understood. And that is why also in this maybe constant movement that we continue to try to do between Palestine and Europe and other places in the Arab world specifically, is a way maybe for us to continue to find a different ground in which we can continue to operate. Because, as I said, not all the time, that is possible. And at this moment, it became impossible for me to continue to live in Palestine. Despite we are married, we have kids. Every time that I would cross the border, I have hours of interrogation that can last 8 days, and all the time it's unsure if I would be allowed by the Israeli authorities to enter and come back to my house. So that is the conditions I lived for 10 years. A conditions that also was very important for me to realize the privilege that many Europeans have, and often they don't realize that you can just take a flight and go almost in every part of the world, and that is colonial heritage. That freedom of movement is based on a privilege because Europe colonized the entire world, and of course it's not true the other way around. And that is the kind of structure we live in, and that is a structure that we cannot normalize. And that is maybe is another lessons I've learned from refugee camps But maybe that is another chapter.
Yes. No, I will departure from refugee camps in that sense, because, we return back to Palestine, and obviously, as architects that are interested in decolonization, the first thing you think where colonization really stands are Israeli colonies in the West Bank, right? So we, like Ush-Shirab, the ones that Alessandro showed, we also take different examples of settlements, and we thought how, as architects, we will turn that against itself. What does it mean, indeed, to take an Israeli settlement that is on the top of a hill, and instead of being there in order to separate Palestinians, in order to separate territories, how if that would become the public space that would actually bring all of us together? And in there, indeed, beginning to work there, we began to be so suspicious on how we studied public spaces in faculties of architecture in Europe, because you arrive there, and as an architect, your aspiration is to design a public space, because that is the good, that is the right way, ethical way to do it. If I am designing a public, then I'm good enough. If I'm designing the house of my grandmother, maybe, I am a little bit compromised as an architect. So it's aspiration of all of us. Indeed, in faculties of architecture, normally they ask you to design a square, to design a museum. These are the things where we are very proud of as architects. But arriving to Palestine and beginning indeed to work on Israeli settlements, the first thing you realize that, Palestinians had so different ways of being in collective beyond the public, and in that sense, beyond the institutional public, the state, right? So we have forms of masha', and the masha' is a way in which we operate in collectivity, like Palestinian farmers would come together and would plant faraway lands from the villages by collectively working around it, and you have that land for that year, and it's constantly changing, so you don't get addicted to that particular land. They change it constantly as a way of working collectively together, and the moment that you are not anymore active in the masha' is not anymore yours. It returns back to the public. So what Israel did, and that is where we have to be very aware of what does public means. Israel arrives to any kind of, there is masha', waqf, and many other collective forms. They came, and as very good urban planners, they design all these forms of collectivity. They call it public, and in the name of public, Palestinians has been expropriated of all way of collectively being together. So it's not that if we design a public, then we are absolutely sort of good people. We have to ask, what is the public we are designing exactly? Who are in use with that public? And actually only think about it this way. The public in Europe especially doesn't need someone, it doesn't need people, it works alone. The masha' would never work without people activating it. So what does it mean, indeed, having public that works without necessarily people in it? Actually, in the contrary, sometimes if people are opposing who is hosting that public, means we want to do protests that we do not like that public, we are completely shut down. It's the public, and there is that rhetoric, that heavy rhetoric, I guess, in Europe of the public is for everyone, the public is where diversity meets, the public is where diversity would encounter each other. And maybe in there, I would really like to bring one very important example for me that stayed with me for 8 years. So, when we returned back, I began to work in UNRWA, and I worked there for 8 years, and I was a technocrat. So in that sense, heading a department in the UN, which is UNRWA is the UN that provides services for Palestinian refugees. And in that sense, having worked so my morning until 2:30 will be as a technocrat in UNRWA. I also became to be part of the senior management, which means also ability of sort of deciding and taking a decision on refugee camps. And my afternoons were all around Dar and what does it mean to decolonize. So that sort of form of being in two places simultaneously helps me understand my being inside UNRWA in a completely different manner. And one of the things, of course, I also came out from maybe studying in Europe, in Italy particularly, is like, why don't we have squares like the Italian squares? You know, it's like we are very active in the streets, but we do not have squares, right? And at a certain point, I would arrive in this camp south of the West Bank, and I decide why don't, and especially because few women encourage me there. You know, we were there asking people, what would you like? And few women ask for a square inside one of the camps that is actually quite conservative. So the question raised, so what does it mean indeed to have a square inside a refugee camps that has no state? So the question, who manage a collective swear, became extremely important, and it didn't occur to me, actually. That was also another moment of hitting of who is hosting in the public and who is responsible for the public. And at a sudden, you know, they decided in the camp to raise walls around that square and have 4 doors and 4 walls, and it turned to be a roofless square. And I was shocked as an architect, and it took me a while to process, and they were really very kind with me to teach me one, maybe, and if not the most important lesson of my life as an architect, is how do you think we manage that place if it is an abstract place? You know, we don't have a municipality. So in that sense, they gave me few examples of, imagine there are a group of women that are coming together, they take that square, they occupy that square in this moment, and they want to have their own privacy, sing together, laugh there, make their party. Maybe you saw also a few of these images. And in that sense, it's immediately in front of that door when people would see that party going on and they are not invited to that party, they just simply leave. Or kids are playing in the square and they are playing football and a pregnant woman would pass by. If she's passing by the alleys, the way I always imagined, and a football would hit her, because they told me, look, we are the one doing our own juries in this. So if anything happened, we are responsible for our streets, we are responsible for our sort of alleys. So we have to sit and say, who is responsible for what? If people will happen by chance, there is no way we can manage that as a community. They told me we need threshold. Threshold is extremely important in order for a community to actually self-organize. If you are a state, you don't need a threshold because you are God managing these people. So you don't need that threshold. But if you are people managing a space together, you need thresholds in order to understand who is the host and who is the guest in that sense. There is not only one monotheistic big host. If we are a community and we deal with each other, hosts is changing all the time, and hosts needs to take responsibility of that, taking care of that place. And for me, actually, maybe that is, if I have to be brutal, that is one of the most important lessons I learned in refugee camp that I brought with me back to Europe and has been my way of processing a return life in Europe. But maybe I would pass it to Alessandro and then come back to how I return back to Europe with that particular sort of knowledge from refugee camps.
Here I just like maybe to use my head as a sort of teacher. And since I was proposing just to reflect on the words that we use, so I would like to come back to some of the words that also Sandy used and to see if they resonate, with you or not. And she was describing al-Masha, that historically was a common land that was shared among farmers, in which the farmers would decide how to cultivate the land. And for us, was very inspiring to look the use of al-Masha, but I would say the use of common land in Palestine before the Israeli colonization. There were several forms of being common without the state. So one thing that, for example, I have been educated in Western universities, that if you want to understand the city, the basic structure is public and private spaces, right? This is a public space, you go to your house, and this is a private space, right? Now, if you are in a refugee camp, this category actually doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because in a refugee camp, you don't have a municipality. You do have streets, but it's not, the lighting on the streets is not put on by a municipality. So there is no sense of a public entity that actually could take care of the space that they are in common. Similarly, even the private home, despite everyone knows who built that house and who put the money and the labor in the house, but since there is a refugee camp, by law, you are not allowed to own a private title on the house that you actually built, because refugee camps, just to remember to everyone, were built just to be a temporary situation, right? Therefore, when you are in a refugee camp, suddenly, all the knowledge that the Western, in my case, the Western study that I had as urban planner, it didn't make any sense. It actually prevented me to understand, how life is organized, where suddenly the notion of the public and the private space doesn't help you to understand how that is done. And one of the concepts that, in a way, was for us important to use was the concept of al-Masha, was the concept that you are able to understand how the common is produced when people decide together to produce something into common. And it is very different from the public. Now, we are so much used to understand this dichotomy, and that is modernity, unfortunately, that it's very difficult to understand that between the private and the public space, there are so many other forms in which people can live that are not necessarily trapped into the private and the public. That also shows, how modernity brought this kind of homogenization of life, dividing completely these two realms, separated, even though our life is constantly in need of transgression of that sort of separations. Now, in Palestine, since there is no state, there is a colonial power, and there are refugee camps, in a way, you are able to see what does it mean to organize life and how life is produced when people decide, for example, to organize their life in a refugee camp. So one of the, let's say, being in conversation with you would also mean think about how every day you are transgressing this private and public spaces and being able maybe to produce something that somehow is not under the jurisdiction of the public and not under the jurisdiction of the private. And that is one of the tasks that's been now since a couple of decades for us to reopen, the possibility to imagine communality that is not supervised by neither the public and nor the private. So that is definitely one term that we would like to propose. The second, we briefly mentioned the refugee camp, and that may be similar to Fraternidad, that needs maybe to be redefined. Because if I say refugee camps, most of you think about refugee camp as something that people put up as a tent, as a shelters, But if you visit Palestinian refugee camps that were built in 1948, they don't look anymore simply as as made of tents. And of course, they also call for a different redefinition of what is a refugee camp, when you still have a colonial power that is constantly, of course, producing a history of displacement. And another concept that becomes very important for us to understand, this specific dimensions of refugee camps is the idea of permanent temporariness. So what does it mean when a temporary conditions, like the Israeli occupations, because by law should supposed to be over, is perpetuated for so long time, and when the right of return of the Palestinians, that's something inscribed in international law, has been also postponed for so many years. So you live in this sort of suspensions of everything, so that you, of course, and it's designed politically to be like this. And the refugee camps, if you like, is the spatial architectural manifestations of a political crisis, when you don't know anymore how to deal with the possibility of including someone in a community. The solutions, the political, legal, and spatial solution is suspensions, is to enforce people to live in this suspended state, waiting one day for things to be resolved. And that is so dramatic. You can imagine that when that condition is so prolonged, here we don't have the time, of course, to also recount the fundamental history that since the Nakba in 1948 and the continuation of the Nakba, because, we haven't imagined, and these are the moments which I feel that I lost my ground, because when we were talking about refugee camps, we were seeing them in this historical trajectory, how we get out of it. And now, with a recent escalation into a genocide, of course, also our own understanding of that history somehow get completely smashed, because what does it mean then to add into that dramatic history since 1948 until today, something that it could maybe historically be remembered even something worse than the Nakba itself, where Palestinians were expelled from the historical Palestine. And these are the moments which I have to say I lose a little bit myself. So maybe, should I make you a question?
No, I want to speak about my return to Europe. Maybe that would be your question,
Okay.
right? I mean, I don't want
But this
to
doesn't
finish.
work like this, then.
No, it doesn't work like that. I don't want,
I have to
because
make you
mindful
difficult
about
question.
time, right? We have to begin wrapping up, right? So I would absolutely love to bring you in how I return back to Europe, because for me that is extremely important, also to share certain frustrations. We have been so nice so far, but I think that some fractions is needed at the end of the conversation. And indeed, I don't know. I mean, I personally had different parts of my life trajectory. So first, I was in Palestine until I was 17 years old, and I also had both the experience of being under colonialism, but also of fighting colonialism, of resisting colonialism, of a non-violent first intifada where we gather, we organize ourselves, etc., etc. And then I went to study in Europe, in Italy particularly, and I was really faced of a generation that has so little to do with what I thought we should be fighting for. I realized that my peers in Italy were smashing the family as a very conservative, oppressive structure, smashing the state, smashing so many things. And it was all about destruction, right? And I was coming from a place that actually it feels so strange to talk about it in this historical moment. But during the first Intifada, we were hopeful that, a possible world for us there was that possibility, right? So in some way, I left Palestine in that sense, went to Italy, studied modern architecture, and I would be sad if we do not speak about how modernity and colonialism are hand to hand in order, when they came to colonial destinations, when they came to Palestine, they didn't tell us we are coming to steal your land. They come to us with this promise of modern civilization, right? We are coming to civilize you. We are coming to modernize you. And actually, I have to say, I myself also a little bit collapsed into, I'm going to study modern architecture, so I return back to modernize Palestine, right? So, and in that sense, I will come back to be enabling an idea of knowledge colonization in Palestine, right? So it's very important. And I will come very closely to why I think it's very important to question certain aspects, dark side of modernity, because there is a dark side of modernity that is not progress towards gender equality, towards progress for rights, et cetera, et cetera. There is a very, very dark part of modernity that was the main assistant. I always say that was the good wife of the bad colonizer, right? That comes with the promise of civilization, of modernization. I mean, to make a very long story short, when I arrived to Italy, I accepted myself as a student migrant, right? And I accepted to begin from a tabula rasa. So all the knowledge that I was carrying valued nothing. I had to make a race to run and learn all the knowledge that comes from the West, because that is the knowledge. That is the knowledge that would civilize you. That is the knowledge that will bring you in. And I have to say, I arrived to a point where, when you eat a lot of something, you develop an allergy, right? And I'm very, very, very allergic to the word inclusion. When somebody says we would like to include you, I mean, my face becomes so red, and I'm unable to keep my temper down. Just, including me. Why? Who gave you that pretentious idea that you need to include? I mean, what does including someone? Why do you think you can be the main host forever? And here maybe I want to very quickly jump into returning back. When I had to return back to Europe, I knew that I did not want to be included, because I am allergic, So when you are allergic to something and you return back to a place, and, I am a great joker in the cards, wherever you put me, I works, I mean, black hair, Palestinian woman, I speak okay. So I worked, I'm a joker. You can put me wherever you want and you go well. And it's just like, what does that mean for me? Always being included and always accepted to be part of that. And I didn't want to return back as a migrant. After we returned back to Palestine, 10 years of building in dignity, being myself, being at the center of my life, producing my knowledge, together actually, but producing also a knowledge where I felt I am belonging to, I was not ready to return back to Europe, because I knew that there is nothing waiting for me in Europe but to be included. So at the beginning, I really opposed very strongly, and my father was just like, why aren't you happy to go to the most welfare state of the world? Sweden is considered one of the happiest places on earth. And, I didn't have words. I didn't understand why I was not happy to return back to Sweden, or to return back to Europe, I have to say. I didn't know what Sweden is. So in that sense, I returned back very, very skeptical. And definitely, I returned back with a promise to myself that I will never accept to be included. Either I can include and be included, but to be only one way included, I am beyond that. When you are a student, you can share homes with other students. There are certain things that you accept to do. I was beyond being included in Europe. So I arrived and says, okay, what is my task? What I can do? What is a possibility for me? And a lot of time I return back to Arabic for me, it's a very important sometimes way of refuging. And there is a part of the Islamic hadith that I think it's really extremely important, speaking about hospitality, and says, الضيافة ثلاثة أيام وما بعد فصدقة. means in English, hospitality is for 3 days, and after that, it becomes charity. So my question to myself is like, what will happen with me the 4th day I arrive to Sweden, right? I accept to be respected guest for the first 3 days, and that brought me to how hospitality in the Arab world is perceived as a temporary practice. It's 3 days practice. And after that, you know, it's like Christmas. You can be very kind with everyone for 3 days. And then you have to go beyond that. There is no way that you continue in the same kindness, right? It's the same with hospitality. What I found problematic, and especially within a Western philosophy, bringing people like Derrida and others, they actually, by proposing the unconditional hospitality, they accepted, or they unconsciously, with a colonial mind, moved hospitality from being a temporary 3 days practice into unconditional hospitality. But the host will remain the host, knowing that, you know, being colonial host, you cannot really be host forever. So let's make it unconditional. And I think for me, the real then struggle coming back to Europe, I began to work on a project where it was about demanding our right to be hosts and not be eternal guests. Because when they ask you to behave, you know, if they are coming to our societies, they have to behave and become one of us. I tell you, this project of the EU is a very, very disturbing project, because that means that what is proposed is like, you know, only assimilation. And I would be one of these people in Italy that would win a prize of integration, right? But I never became Italian. So I would be one of these examples that ticks all the points, you know, married an Italian man, still in love after 25 years of marriage, have 2 amazing daughters. I miss Italy much more than how Alessandro miss Italy. I like the place where he comes from much more than how much he likes him, but I have never become Italian. So that promise of, if you behave, you become one of us, is a promise that the EU did not actually respect me in that. And I decided I will never come back with the same contract. If I am here, I pretend my right to host 3 days after I arrive. That means actually creating spaces for migrants to host. And guess what? And I will finish with that. We created a space in the north of Sweden that considers itself one of the most democratic societies in Europe. After 3 years, refugees began to host so strongly, so they began to invite politicians, they began to ask the mayor, you know, we come to your office, of course we come to your office and we are very happy to be your guests, but you have to come also to us, and we would like to have you as guests in your own sort of place, right? And that became a very active place in the north of Sweden, because, you know, many migrants then, when they arrive, they began also to speak the language of our right to be host. We don't want only to be guests. 3 years after, this project has been commissioned by a state public art agency, which is a state agency. The migration office decided to close it without giving any explanation. And I asked, as an artist, at least to have one only time of discussion with the people that decided to close the place, because I was very curious on why I needed to build my story, right, of why that has been closed. They closed it. It was closed by a state agency. And guess what? Moderna Mosaic decided to acquire it and preserve it. So that project has been commissioned by a state, closed by a state without even saying why they are closing it, and preserved by a state. And that shows actually the complexity of willing from one side to see people acting, to see migrants like us, people that comes from a diverse sort of grounds coming in, yet not act to the point to become strong enough to question certain things, right? To be really part of building that society. And for me, what really happened, and I will end by that, refugees and migrants that found themselves in the extreme north of Europe were able to act upon their right to be host. Yet, Swedish democratic migration officers were unable to see themselves as guests and were unable to give with this idea of them being the saviors of the world, which is a very, very colonial heritage that needs to be taken into consideration. So if you will find yourself only hosting, please question your colonial heritage. If you are unable to accept the guests after the third day of arriving to Spain, if they would like to build their vocabulary, discuss their vocabulary, create thresholds where you will be hosted and being hosted by. That is for me where the colonial heritage of Europe needs to be questioned. And thank you very much.
And should we have a little bit of lights on? And if we take some questions, if you have time, yes, if there are any.
Thank you, Sandy and Alessandro. I will use this colonial language. And apologies, because as you mentioned, Spanish is also a colonial language, and maybe even more for Menorcans. So I just wanted to ask, in this idea of being you raise such a wide array of terminology that I think is super important when analyzing Palestine and how to think of this sort of like post-genocide, if we see an end to it, hopefully soon. But how to reimagine that space, reimagine, let's say, a Gaza or a West Bank after genocide. You have given us a series of examples of how the public space is considered or has been conceived by the communities in Palestine, this idea of al-Masha', but also how would you, I don't know how to frame this, but the question, how would you reimagine that space with all the trauma that has befallen upon the Palestinians? That is, all the people who have now lost their limbs, all the, let's say, orphans. How does that affect the would-be public space? The fact that the actual social fabric has been torn by the extremely brutal occupation. I don't know if you can have a thought about that.
Well, let me try to, that is, I think, one of the hardest questions that we can ask. And I have to say that I'm not sure we will be able, there is no way not to carry that heritage of such trauma. The question is definitely how do you deal with that, and also mainly how you will not continue destruction. Because being architects, we understand that reconstruction Gaza, without taking into consideration all the ties between the public and the private in the space, what is already been produced while they are there, because they are not standing, and to reconstruct Gaza from up down is about continuing with architecture to destruct Gaza and Palestine. Actually, I have to say, we are speaking about all Palestine in that sense. So what does it mean if you want, sometimes having purpose in life after a genocide helps a lot, because I see a lot of people that are able on individual levels to actually, even if they have passed so harsh time on individual level, to still be finding themselves if they would find a purpose, right? And my hope, my wishful thinking in that sense as Palestinian is to understand how we are guiding even the rest of the world to understand what does it mean to build a society that is built in between the private and the public, that is not controlled only by a public governance, and that is not only controlled by capitalism, but in that sense controlled by a way of being together in the world in a different way. And let me give you one very quick example. As an architect, I really refuse. My grandmother worked 20 years in order to buy a tiny piece of land, 500 meters square of land in Beit Sahur, where she built on top. She began to build, and then my uncles, and then my cousins, so that place for me is my belonging to Palestine. And I'm among the luckiest that actually are still living in the place where my grandmother sort of rooted us. And I really refuse hardly to call this private property, as someone in Menorca or in New York would buy 10 apartments that have never visited, right? So what does it mean when we think about private and public? We consider what my grandmother did, how we return back to heritage of Palestine, where many grandparents, parents, and kids are still figuring out how to rebuild that. If we will accept a top-down building in that sense, the way that many are proposing, without even being part of whatever is happening, considering the rebels, only rebels to be thrown in the water, I think we will absolutely, which is very high risk that is happening, we will continue destructing Gaza and Palestine. And I'm afraid that if we will not immediately oppose it and resist against it, I am afraid that it will take us to a place of no return.
Now, thank you for your enlightening conversation. At the beginning of this year, at my university, we invited a Palestinian writer, Mah Kayal, to give the inaugural talk, which he gave online. And when he was asked what was the most important thing for him, for his writing, he said, to use literature as an instrument of liberation. And then he added, and for me, liberation from imperialism, from colonialism, would imply not asking Palestinian writers to always be representing the Palestinian plight and writing for international audience about what the suffering of Palestinians is. Because, no, for me, liberation, he said, was to write for my people, to write, and I don't need to tell them what they're going through. This for me was a very important lesson, because he was saying, I'm getting invited to festivals, universities to talk about this, and I always expected to be a representative. No? And you, Sandy, presented this complicated paradox of how to avoid being always in the role of the guest in front of the host. And I think there's this other paradox, the sort of condemnation or fate in which, on the one hand, one has to bear witness of what is happening, and it is important to bear witness about what is happening, but at the same time, that it displaces the position because the dialogue is always with this other former colonial powers or present colonial powers. It is a dialogue with the center of imperialism to make this center aware of what is happening elsewhere because they don't want to look. So how can one come out of this difficult bind, of at the same time think in terms of freedom of an experience and use art, literature, whatever, in dialogue with other forms of human existence that is not just talking this constantly in the same role. I was wondering.
Maybe I want to still be adding one part for me that I have to say, I was extremely lucky to be working with Alessandro in that sense. And because, when you working with him, coming from a Western knowledge on base of love, because sometimes we really underestimate what love might bring on the table, right? So it's extremely very important to deal with that. And I think it's one part that was impossible for me when I arrived to Europe, and especially because Palestine is under threat of erasures. So we become very resistance towards anything that can criticize Palestine, right? I mean, self-criticism for us is a double hard practice because we have first to actually make sure that the space stays. And in the same time, what for me, the real risk of what we are passing in this moment as Palestinians is that we have no space for self-criticism. And there is no way that you can go for self-determination without it being accompanied by self-criticism. And that is where I see the task of as many intellectuals in the world that can come together, but they should be coming with this humbleness of not teaching. My problem with Europe is that, they feel that their real task is to teach others rather than, and that is where I feel that it's oppressive to be host forever, right? I mean, because it feels like this is what I know how to do, and it's so hard for me just to lose my words because I am in a place where I should be simply guest. I don't have to teach the rest of the world how they have to save the planet, how they have to, name it all. I don't want to name how many things in European institutions is still wanting to teach, right? So I think if we will come together, because we do need, for me, it was extremely important to be able not to be afraid to question, for example, what is the right of return today for Palestinians without including the refugee camp and the history of the refugee camp in the middle. And I would have never gone there alone. To touch upon, in a self-critical way, to touch upon the right of return in Palestine is pornography, is a taboo. There is no way you can do that, even though we sold it, that right of return. Yet, if you open your mouth and speak about it, it is a problematic, right? It's highly... So I think if we come together, accepting that we move constantly between being guest and host. Indeed, I am a believer that a real democracy is possible only if people are moving constantly between being guests and hosts. If we keep the binaries of being only hosts, of being only guests means also accepting your situation as an oppressed, and that you have to convince your host that he has to give you charity as many days as possible, as many months as possible, and many years as possible. And then you will arrive to a point that you lose your dignity. I mean, definitely you lose your dignity. So what does it mean today, departing from Palestine and actually understanding that the system of nation states, we have been, I don't know how many of you are aware of what is happening in Venice Biennial in this moment. I mean, it's collapsing because it only depends on understanding the world through a colonial nation state sort of gaze, and that is not working, right? So in which way I think, and to use the word, in which way we come together. I love the word izwa in Arabic rather than, the word izwa in Arabic comes from dear. And you might have 10 brothers, but there is only one brother that is your izwa, not all of them. Because you know that in a moment of difficulty, that person, man or woman or other figures, will be there for you. And there is no need to speak about it, right? So the izwa is a way in which you understand that you're there for me when I need you, and that sometimes you're the strong and sometimes I am the strong. And sometimes you're the weak and sometimes I am the weak. But we know, we already told each other that we will be dears for each other. We will be there in that sense. And when we actually found ourselves going to Cairo because we wanted to be nearby Gaza, we asked ourselves who we are. What is it that we are doing? And actually, I really needed to feel the Palestinian izwa going in Cairo, going nearby Gaza. What does it mean actually, instead of I want to help you, sustain you, this and that. I mean, we're strong, guys. We're very, very, very strong. We have built such a history that would be hunting us forever, and you will be finding more and more strong Palestinians sitting on the stage, speaking and talking. And it's time to think that why don't we learn from each other? And in order to learn from each other, you have to unlearn so many things. The task of unlearning is so heavy in Europe. So I think earlier you begin to unlearn, better is for the rest of the world.
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias a los dos por
Right, thank you very much to the two of you for telling us thank you very much to the two of you for having encouraged us to start unlearning. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for your words. Thank you for feeling you not only as guests, of course, but also as hosts. Thank you so much to the two of you.
Oui, tu peux peut-être, je parle ici, tu peux peut-être m'enlever cet ordinateur. Là. Je sais pas qui il est. Il doit être...
So I can remove this one. Yes.
Ah oui, je veux bien, tout à fait, je veux bien.
Je vais présenter d'abord.
Voilà, très bien.
Non, on va le mettre là-dessous. Ouais, très bien.
Merci.
Bueno, pues
Right.
después de este
After
descentramiento
this decentralizing exercise that has truly touched me
de esa práctica en el presente y
about
como lo han dicho los dos
this
también
practice of being
de ese amor
present and
entre
this
otras que permite
love
también su práctica, ¿no? Su práctica en el
that
presente.
allows
Y eso es
this
la idea
present,
de esta conversación en torno a
the,
esa
the
frase que ya hemos
conversation
hablado a lo largo de
around
estos días de
this
darlo
idea
todo
that
en
we've
el
mentioned
presente
about
y para eso se
giving
lo hemos pedido
everything, giving it all
a
in the
Anne,
present
que
moment,
es parte
has
de la
encouraged us
familia
to
de las
request
Trovadas,
and
que sin duda
part
es
of
una de las
the
voces
Trovadas family, without a
camusianas
doubt, one
más
of the
poderosas
Camusian
y más vivas
voices,
de nuestro
uh,
tiempo, que es profesora, es escritora
embodying
y que ha
more
dedicado años a
rigor as a
explorar
writer,
la obra de
professor
Camus
who's dedicated
como
years to
objeto de
explore
estudio, no, sino
Camus'
realmente
work
como
as
una
object
brújula.
of her study and as a guiding,
Hoy
the
cierra este
North
ciclo
Star
de reflexiones de
in
esta
her
10ª
career.
exposición con este
She
título,
will
Darlo
and
todo en el
will
presente,
close
siendo además
this
que fue su
10th edition
tesis y estoy segura
actually with the
que
title
no solo
of
será una conferencia
Giving It
sobre
Your All
Camus,
in
sino
the
que será
present.
también
It will not only
una
be part
guía
of
poética para hoy.
a
Así que
Camusian
muchas
debate, but it
gracias,
will
Anne, por
surely
estar un
be
año más con
a
nosotros
guiding
y espero.
enlightenment for all of us. I'm looking forward to listening to you. Thank you, Anne.
Bonjour, vraiment, je vois personne, hein, mais bon,
I
vous me
can't
voyez.
see
Bonjour à tous.
anyone. Good morning, everybody, and thank you
Merci beaucoup,
very
Sandra.
much.
Merci,
Thank you,
Carlos. Merci,
Sandra,
Trobades.
Carlos.
C'est vrai que
Thank
je me
you
sens vraiment
to the
amie
Trovadas. I
ici
feel
depuis toutes ces
really
années.
as
C'est
a
vraiment le
friend
privilège
after all
de
these
vivre
years.
ces
It's been a
rencontres et
true
de
privilege for us to
tellement les
leave
recevoir.
these
Et je voulais dire
gatherings.
quelque chose, je ne sais pas
And
si
I wanted to
Sandy
say
est encore là,
something. I don't know
qui
if
va me
Sand is
parler
still
parce
there,
que
because
elle me faisait penser à une
she helped
nouvelle
me
que
think
j'avais lue
about
dans l'exil et le royaume qui s'appelle
in the
L'Autre.
exile and the
En français, je voudrais
realm
rappeler que
called
l'hôte est
L'Hôte
aussi à la
in
fois celui qui
French
invite,
is sometimes
à la fois
the
celui qui est invité,
person,
pas d'exception.
the
Je ne sais pas
guest,
si elle est là
or
maintenant.
the host. I don't know
Alors
whether
merci
she's
Sandra,
there.
tu
So
me
thank you,
mentionné
Sandra.
de revenir au
Uh,
texte et de revenir à
you
Camus.
have
Donc c'est ce que je
requested me
propose
to go
pendant ces
back
quelques
to
minutes à
Camusian's
travers cette
ideas.
magnifique
So
phrase, la vraie
here we
générosité
go. The true
envers
generosity
l'avenir
towards
consiste
the
à
future
tout donner au
consists in
présent.
giving everything to the
Alors, vous
present.
savez, c'est à la fin
So,
de
as you
l'Antiquité,
know, this
donc
is
vers
at
le
the end of the
siècle
Rebel
1251,
in
Camus exerce
1951,
cette
where
pratique
Camus
particulière
infuses this
d'être
particular
libre,
way of being in the
tout donner
world.
au présent.
Giving everything to the
C'est pas
present
quelque chose
is
qui se
not a
passerait
phrase
par hasard,
written by chance
parce
by
que depuis
Camus,
longtemps,
because for a long
toute sa
time,
vie,
his entire
il a
life
en soi
had been
un rapport
committed to this
particulier avec
very
le temps.
particular relationship with
On peut
time.
vraiment évoquer
Yes, we can
une
speak of a
poétique du présent
poetics of the present that
traditionnelle
permeates his
à travers
work,
des
his
paysages, des
relationship with
personnages, des
landscapes,
personnes,
characters,
et
and
qui
people,
engage, on le verra
and
avec
which,
Camus,
as we shall
une
see, even
réflexion.
informs a
Alors, je vous
political
propose
stance.
quelques
I would
réflexions
like to
sur
offer a
cette
few
poésie
comments on this
centrale chez Camus.
central idea in
En
Camus'
commençant,
work.
je voudrais rappeler
To
finalement
begin with, I'd
deux
like to
aspects
highlight
très
two
importants
very concrete
qui
aspects
conditionnent
that
son
shape
rapport au présent.
Camus'
C'est pas par
relationship
hasard,
with the present
c'est
time. It's
grâce
not out of
à eux. Mais
chance
d'abord,
that
l'Algérie.
this happened.
Comme
First of
vous le
all,
savez,
Algeria.
je sais,
As you
Camus est né
know,
en Algérie.
Camus was born
Son
in
ami
Algeria,
Jean
and
Grenier,
his
qui est
friend
historien
Jean
de l'Algérie,
Granier said,
disait
he was a
pour
philosophy
parler
teacher.
d'Albert
To
Camus,
speak of
il
Albert
faudrait
Camus,
d'abord
one would
parler
first
de
have to
l'Algérie.
speak of
Non pour
Algeria, not to
l'exporter dans
explain
son
him
pays,
through his
mais
country, but
parce que
because certain
historiquement,
traits of his
le
character
débat se
can only be
construit
understood through it.
et
Camus indeed elaborates in his Nos, the Nuptials, published in 1939, his second publication in the chapter Summer in Algiers. He says, this country offers no lessons. It neither promises nor offers a glimpse of what lies ahead. It is content to give, but in abundance. The relationship with the present among the people of Algiers doesn't stem from a theoretical concept or a highly elaborate philosophy of life. These companions from Algiers with whom he shared his childhood and of whom he makes an almost sociological study in Nos have neither a sense of sin nor of eternity. They know only the present. It's a joie de vivre without a future. Lacking material possessions or wealth, like in Camus and his family, they live in constant contact with nature. And Camus says, these entire people cast into the present live without myth, without consolation. And he continues, everything we do here reflects a carefree attitude towards the future. What matters are those truths that the hand can touch. The truth of the world lies in the tangible and the concrete. Algeria offers him immediate contact with beauty and compels him to embrace the unique and fleeting nature of the moment. He reiterates his commitment to rejecting at all the latters of the world and not to relinquish his present wealth. Just as a theater stage or a football stadium contributes to one's education, Algeria is a land of learning. Yet the lessons it imparts are not unambiguous. Proof of this is the other, more austere side of the present, embodied by the town of Jemila, again from the same collection, Nos. It's a town swept by a wind that leads nowhere and opens onto no country. The chapter devoted to it in Nos bears the mark of, this time, death. In this landscape polished by the wind, which encourages a courageous lucidity, the narrator has a different experience of time. Yes, he says, I am present. And what strikes me at this moment is that I cannot go any further. Like a man imprisoned for life, and everything is present to him. In this singular landscape, he finds the courage to face the inevitability of his death. I quote, for me, before this world, I do not wish to lie, nor do I wish to be lied to. To live in the present moment is to face one's finitude with lucidity. He says, I want to carry my lucidity through to the end and look upon my end with all the intensity of my jealousy and my horror. And he's a young man when he says this. He was only 25. And why does he say this? Because the sad song of Jamila brings him back to his death, back to the second defining element of Camus' life, defining his relationship with present, his illness. So, as you know, Camus' tuberculosis, discovered when he was diagnosed when he was 17, as he began to cough up blood, undoubtedly had a profound impact on his life. Until the age of 30, he suffered 3 bouts of tuberculosis that forced him to interrupt his studies and various activities. In particular, he was denied the medical certificate required to become a teacher. And the sunlight, the dazzling light of the sun, it was rupture for him. The sensation of death, he says, which is now familiar to me, to sense death at the mere sight of a handkerchief stained with blood. From then on, throughout his life, he lived with his sick, weakened body, which would regularly force him to take long breaks, to spend time in the mountains, a prospect that didn't please the Mediterranean man. It was thus that he spent 15 months during the Second World War in Les Chambons-sur-Lignon, a French village, between 1942 and 43. A body in pain inevitably brings one back to the present. On rereading his travel journals, one comes to understand his companionship imposed on Camus by his illness. For this, travel journals allow him to follow him almost daily. During a trip to Italy, there is talk of fevers, enforced rest, and illness. And I quote, all day in bed with a fever that won't subside. Fortunately, I can see the sea from my bed. 11th of December, in bed all day or almost, a feverish state that takes away my appetite for everything. I need my strength. The same, for example, in 1949 in Brazil, in bed with a fever, flu, the 26th and 27th of August, two dreadful days when I drag out my flu in indifference. So these are just a few examples that show that illness is not merely a figment of the imagination, but a constant companion. Although it should be noted that apart from when traveling, Camus remains discreet on this subject. So illness teaches him the value of time. He quotes illness and its decline. There is not a minute to lose, which is perhaps the opposite of we must hurry. A striking statement that testifies the maturity of the patient, who doesn't confuse intensity with haste or intensity with agitation, but rather suggesting a deepening of the present moment. Elsewhere, he confides, I quote, what is degrading about all suffering, not letting oneself be swept away by emptiness, trying to overcome and to fill time not to be wasted. At first glance, one may think that the omnipresence of death lets a distance for existence, discouraging one from living and rendering one insensitive to everything that is happening. But most of the time, presence of death fundamentally heightens his love of life. This sense of urgency that haunts Camus and this certainty that everything must die one day are the consequences of his experience of an illness that at the time was still fatal. He evokes his sense of precariousness again in the Wrong Side and the Right Side in 1937, the first text published, when he says, I quote, there lay all my love of life, a silent passion for what might perhaps slip away from me, a bitterness beneath a flame. Every day I left that cloister as if snatched from myself, inscribed for a brief moment in the duration of the world. There are numerous accounts from Camus' contemporaries who noted this sense of urgency in him. Thus, Jean Grenier said, but the author of The Plague was in a hurry. His time was limited, so was his work. He had to move quickly. I sense in the man and in the work the spur of necessity. This sense of urgency is reinforced by Camus' exceptional awareness of the gravity of the issues at stake. As he wrote to Jean Grenier as early as 1935, he was 22 back then. I quote, I have such a strong desire to see a reduction in the sum of misery and bitterness that poisons people's lives. Such a statement bears witness to an early ethical commitment that led him to focus his attention on those most exposed to suffering, the poor and the humiliated. It is worth noting that these numerous reflections that are an evidence, again, in the present time, as if poverty and poor people were um, taken or lacked projection. There are numerous examples of in Le Premier Homme, The First Man, which was published posthumously. It was a great inspiration. In The First Man, the main character, who actually is this cleaning lady belonging, and this is the object of this, and I quote here, with no other plan than the immediate.
Selon les dires du narrateur, Lucie est, je cite, l'esclave soumise des jours et de la vie.
According to the narrator, Lucy is the submissive slave of days and of life. Incapable of the slightest attempt to master time, incapable of the slightest choice, she simply displays a blind patience. Camus had also planned to begin this image, metaphor of the mother, the blind donkey that patiently for years circles the water wheel. The image is distressing, yet extremely telling. It confirms the negation of prospects that leads to stagnation. All the terms used by the narrator convey a narrow view, the absence of a horizon, of a horizon, like a curse of poverty that is barely bearable in the narrator's eyes. In a completely different context, we might consider a series of newspaper articles devoted to poverty. So this is the Camus as a journalist. So it's a set of 11 articles devoted to poverty in Kabylie in 1939. In these newspaper articles, Camus denounces the excesses of colonialism and is appalled by the living conditions of the inhabitants. He seems deeply moved by the poverty, which results in an inability to lose oneself in the moment, particularly in the beauty of an evening. And I quote, "And at this hour, when the shadow descending from the mountains upon this splendid land brings a sense of calm to even the hardest of hearts, I knew, nevertheless, that there was no peace for those who, on the other side of the valley, were gathering around a flatbread. I also knew that there would have been a sweetness in surrendering to this evening, so surprising and so magnificent, but that this misery, whose fires glowed before us, cast a kind of ban on the beauty of the world." We know the price that these daring articles denouncing the excesses of colonialism exacted from the 26-year-old journalist who dared to stand up to the colonial administration. Here, the poor, crying out in hunger, are trapped in this narrow present, denied access to the gentle twilight of the falling evening, excluded from the experience of beauty. The supreme misfortune is to lack sky or light. The origin of the demand for justice that never ceases to drive Camus stems from this scandal. Unable to grasp the truths within their grasp, imprisoned in a present that cuts them off from the beauty of the world, preoccupied as they are with their survival. Like the character of the mother in The Wrong Side and Right Side, who, after her day as a cleaner, can only lose herself in the frantic pursuit of a groove in the floorboards. That as many people as possible might have access, even fleetingly, to the beauty of the world as it reveals itself to those who can surrender to it. It seems to me that Camus, out of a sense of fraternity, wished for this. It is difficult to let oneself be carried away alone by the tenderness of twilight when beside you the other is prevented from doing so. True generosity towards the future consists in giving everything to the present. It is precisely a present that is open to the future, a creative present. Camus was moved by the plight of those deprived of a present dignified enough to allow them to still look upon the world. In The Rebel, the writer focuses on the figure of the man who, in the depths of his being, cries out for justice in the face of evil. This inner rebellion becomes a generous defense of humanity and solidarity with the humiliated in the present moment. And I quote, this mad generosity is that of the revolt, which immediately gives its strength of love and hesitantly rejects injustice. The honor of generosity lies in calculating nothing and giving everything to the present moment and to one's living brothers. The generosity towards the future consists in giving everything to the present. In The Rebel, Camus firmly opposed ideologies, particularly certain strands of Marxism that asserted that one must accept a dictatorship or violence today to guarantee a utopia or perfect justice tomorrow. For Camus, the future is hypothetical. If an injustice is committed today, it is real and concrete. He advocated what he called the midi thinking or midday thinking, a form of revolt that rejects extremes and never sacrifices living human beings on the altar of abstract idea. Camus concludes his essay by contrasting the excesses of totalitarian ideologies with the moderation of revolt. He writes further in the same chapter, does the end justify the means? That is possible, but who will justify the end? To this question, which historical thought leaves unanswered, revolt replies, the means. It is here that Camus defines his ethical limit by rejecting political messianism, sacrificing present generations for a future paradise. He also asserts that justice cannot arise from its opposite. If the means are unjust, the end will necessarily be so. So give everything to the present. For Camus, constantly projecting oneself into the future is an escape. It is a way of avoiding confronting immediate injustice, and true generosity is not a promise of a bright future, but a total commitment to the person standing before us. To give to the present is to create, to love, to fight without expecting any historical or divine reward. It is a call to live intensely and ethically without allowing oneself to be blinded by hope, which for him is a form of resignation, or by despair, which could paralyze us. To give everything to the present so that everyone may face this present without bowing down, without enduring it, but by exhausting the field of the possible, to borrow Pindar's phrase, having the strength to live a creative present. In the light, writes Camus on the final page of The Rebel, the world remains our first and last love. Our brothers breathe under the same sky as we do. Justice is alive. Yes, it is indeed here and now that fraternity is put to the test. And we've understood what this means right now with no delays. And we've seen these during these 2 days in our places, in our territories, in our scale. Thank you.
Qui veut rebondir sur ce que tu as dit?
Would you like to say what or respond?
Merci Anne, c'était très beau, très
Thank you,
camusien.
Anne. It was really beautiful and Camusian. My name is Agnes. I've come here very often, and I would just simply like to say that in The Rebel, in Rebellion, we also have the inside out, and you've explained that with all the ethical details. And I just wanted to mention this because I'm really very happy to be here. Thank you.
Bon, ben, moi je crois que restons au présent. Merci, Anne, encore.
Well, let's stay in the present. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues nos han introducido al presente de Camus.
So we've been introduced to the present of Camus, and now we wanted to close with our performance, because what we are going to see now is an action that is completed at the time when it takes place. It doesn't exist before nor afterwards. It will only exist now. And this is why I'm very happy to welcome Torreznos, Jaime and Rafael. And this piece they're going to share with us, the human condition. So I leave you with them.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Good morning. Good morning. We are Los Torreznos, and today we are going to do the human condition with you today. And thank you. Yes, thank you. It's very good to have a round of applause before our work, because you might not applaud at the end. So thank you for that. Well, of course, first of all, we would like to thank the organizers and everybody involved in making this fantastic event possible. It's truly fantastic to have a space of critical thinking right now. It is a great thing for us to have this opportunity to participate here. It is also a responsibility to be at the end, and it's also a risk for the organizers to decide to have a performance at the very end. So welcome in any case for this risk, and we will try to do our best. I say, okay, so why are we here? Well, we don't really know why we've been invited, but in any case, perhaps we might be able to contribute something to this idea of the role of art in this fraternal community we've been discussing today. From our experience and what we do and manage, which is this thing of our performance. Although this doesn't look like a performance, it looks like a talk. But that's the interesting thing in performance, is that it should be surprising and it should never be what people expect it to be. So in that sense, we will see little by little where we're heading, right? Well, just to go back to things that have been mentioned during these 2 days, this idea of the fraternity, brotherhood. Well, we hadn't prepared that, but we've been together for 35 years, more or less. We've been working together for that long. We have very different characters and personalities, as you'll see. And well, perhaps in 35 years' time, well, for 35 years, we've been doing things together. This is an example of fraternity, right? It's a simple or composed or combined fraternity. Well, when we're thinking about this idea of fraternity, perhaps we tend to see the world as something ideal with color under the sun, and also with a rainbow and everything like that. But the fraternity is full of tensions, difficult moments or situations you think you will never overcome. And then sometimes you're completely opposed to your symbolic brother. And here we are. What else? We've had some examples of linking art with the themes that we've been discussing during these days. Well, very intense, wonderful, also very important. And our contribution is from the inside of an experience where we have a blurring of the role of the artist and the person. It is a territory where there's a will, where each person should be a type of artist that is different, a different scale, not a different scale from that of human beings, but that belongs to humankind. So yes, in that sense, our intention is to work not the exterior, but the inside of the artists, the inner being, a sort of electricity plant that is inside the artist, but that the artist needs to come to be able to convert into something that can be shown to the community. Yes, but every person can be that. Yes, of course, but without the label, you know, of artist. Yes, of course. Each person is an artist. That's something we already know. We already heard that yesterday. Everybody, any person can do free diving. We heard that yesterday, and yes, well, this is not so difficult as apnea, but yes, this is the dimension we're talking about. We are all artists, and we, in that sense, all have the opportunity to tell the world about this. And in that sense, well, we could continue talking a lot, of course, but we should also say, well, don't be afraid, don't panic. Well, perhaps the artist, whoever the artist is, we are being too demanding on the artist. They need to know about politics, philosophy, astrophysics, biology. I mean, I don't know, if you know how to do one little thing, a very specific thing, okay, but there's a lot of demands there. Well, yes, it's a bit difficult because nobody really knows if an artist should be a wise man or an ignorant man. Because, well, perhaps the artist will be asked a question about astrophysics and they want to know what to answer. Or perhaps it could be an ignorant man, and we've seen that in the history of art. Some examples. But talking about ignorance is already a very delicate word. Yes, I don't know. It's a bit risky, perhaps. We need to clarify. This should need to be specified or clarified. So perhaps the audience is wondering where we're heading to. Well, the role of the art. Okay, we should at least clarify that. What is the role of art? So let's stand up for this. Yeah, we need to stand up to be able to tell about this. The first thing that needs to be said is that the artist, before being an artist, is a human being. And within that human condition, the artist needs to think about the world and needs to limit a bit their ego that make them precisely artists. That is what makes them an artist. Yes, that's important. But the second important idea is that the artist, artist, should have an affirmative character. Negation? No. Affirmation. Affirmation, and from a constructive point of view. That should be clear too. And with this constructive direction, the artist needs to know what their stance is, and that's identity. Yes, this has been mentioned. They need to know where the identity is in order to be able to enlighten other identities. That's necessary. At the same time, the artist needs to be flexible and be able to place themselves in somebody else's shoes and see other perspectives. So identity, but flexibility at the same time. Yes, and flexibility, you're saying, but it should be aware of the temporal dimension because the artist is working here and now. This is a radical present. And at the same time, the artist should not forget those who placed him there, the previous artists, and also and be aware of the fact that in the future others will understand them better than when they come. Yes, but at the same time, this is being responsible of what one says and does. That's another of the characteristics of an artist. And yes, when you take something on yourself, you need to have good memory. You cannot forget things because you are a representative of a whole community of many others. And this community needs to be always present, active, and willing to host. Yes, yes, you're right. But this brings me to this idea that the artist should have a relationship with the matter, with the concrete, but at the same time also with the invisible, the spirit, essence, something that is unseen. So they need to work in this translation from the visible to the invisible. That's their work. That's the task. And yes, but also when the artist sees this clearly, they understand that there is a very powerful tool to understand the world, the verb, and they need to learn how to use that. Yes, there's no other issue. And in some way, they should fight against what we take for granted. Like, often we say, we already know this. We emptying the meaning of words where we have empty shells. So to avoid those empty shells, the artist knows that as an artist of their time, they should look for new ways of doing things, and they need to experiment, and they need to take on the risk that they will probably not be understood. But that's their obligation, and that's what they do. Yes, and in that sense, this uneasiness, provocation is not something they're looking for, but a consequence of experimentation itself. And from then on, the artist needs to resist and also look into the inside, right? Yes, of course, always look into the inside. How can I bring what I have inside? How can I bring that outside? How can I do that? Bring what I have inside me boiling. How can I bring it out? But not the unintelligible things, but some things in some way that can be understood. You need to focus, concentrate. Okay, let's see, listen, and find out what's boiling inside. And then you start sort of connecting.
Ser.
To be.
Estar.
To be.
Ser. Estar.
To be. To be.
Ser. Estar.
To be. To be. To be. To be.
Yo soy.
I am.
Yo estoy.
I am.
Yo soy. Yo estoy. Yo soy. Soy.
I am.
Yo
I am.
estoy. Estoy. Yo soy.
It's playing with the two meanings of
Soy yo.
the verb to be in Spanish.
Estoy. Yo soy. Yo. Yo soy. Estoy. Yo. Yo soy. Yo estoy. Yo soy. Yo estoy. Yo soy. Yo estoy. Estoy.
We have two verbs for the meaning of to be in Spanish, ser and estar.
Tú estás.
So you are.
Tú estás. Tú eres.
You are.
Tú estás. Estás.
So they playing around with ser, which is the meaning of being as an identity, and estar, which is the meaning of being in a place.
Tú fuiste. Tú fuiste. Tú estuviste. Tú estuviste. Tú estarías.
You were. You were. You would be.
Y tú serías. Tú estarás. Tú estarás. Tú serás. Tú estarás.
You will be.
Tú estarás.
You will be.
Tú serás. Tú estarás. Tú eres. Tú eres.
You are. You are.
Ella es.
She is.
Ella es.
She is.
Ella estaba. Ella estaba.
She was.
Ella estaba. Ella estará. Estará.
She will be. She will be.
Él está. Él está. Él está.
He is. He is.
Él estaría. Estaría. Él estaría.
He would be.
Él fue. Él fue.
He was.
Él fue. Él fue. Él fue.
He was.
Él fue. Él fue. Él fue. Él fue. Él
He
sería,
was.
ella-
He would be.
ella estuvo, ella
She was
estuvo,
there.
Ella está. Ella,
She is.
Ella es.
She is.
Ella
She
es.
is.
Ella está. Él es.
She is here. He is. He is.
estuvo,
He was.
él está
y él estará.
He is, and he will be. He will be. Ah,
Él
he
estaría,
would be.
estaría,
He would be.
estaría,
He would be.
estaría, sí,
He would be. He would be.
ella está, ella
She
está,
is.
ella está, ella
She
está, ella
is.
está, ella está, ella está,
ella
ella
está,
es,
ella es,
ella es,
She
ella
is.
fue, ella fue,
She was.
ella será,
She will be.
será. Nosotros somos,
We
nosotros
are.
fuimos y
We
nosotros
were.
estaremos.
And we will be.
Nosotros fuimos y
We
nosotros
were.
estaremos.
And we will
Nosotros
be.
somos,
And we
nosotros
are.
fuimos y
And we
nosotros
were.
estaremos.
And we
Sí,
will be.
nosotros
Yes.
estamos. Nosotros
We are.
estaremos, estuvimos,
We will be. We were.
estaremos.
And we will
nosotros
be.
estaríamos. Sí, estaríamos.
And we would be.
Pero estamos. Sí.
But we are.
Nosotros estamos.
We
Sí,
are.
estaremos.
And we will be.
Y nosotros somos. Y nosotros
And we
fuimos.
were.
Seremos.
We will be.
Seremos. Y nosotros seríamos.
And we may be.
Somos.
But we are.
Somos. Vosotros.
You.
Fuisteis.
You were.
Vosotros fuisteis.
You
Vosotros
were.
Vosotros fuisteis. Vosotros
You were.
Vosotros
You.
Vosotros fuisteis.
You were.
Vosotros
It was you.
Fuisteis.
It was you.
Vosotros.
You.
Fuisteis vosotros.
It were you.
Ellos
They.
estaban.
They were.
Ellos eran.
They were.
Ellos estaban.
And they were there.
Ellos estarían.
They would be.
Ellos
They.
Ellos
They were.
estarán.
They would be. They will be. They.
Ellos hubieran estado.
They would have been. They
Hubieran
would
estado.
have been.
O sea, ella habría sido.
Would have been.
Y ellas
And they would be.
Ellas habían estado.
They had been.
Él estaba, ella estaba.
He was. She was.
Él fue.
He was.
Ellos
They
habían sido.
had been.
Ellos habían estado.
They had been
Habían estado.
in a place.
Él fue. Él era.
And he was.
Él fue.
He used to be.
Y ellas serán.
And they will be.
Ellas serán. Ellas estarán.
They will be.
Ellas habrían sido. Habrían sido ellas.
They would have been.
Y ellos
And.
habrían estado. Ellos.
And. They.
Siendo. Ellos hubieran sido.
Being. They would have been.
Hubieran sido. Y
They
serían.
would be.
Ellos serían.
They would be.
Nosotros. Yo soy yo. Yo soy yo.
I am. I. I'm.
Somos nosotros.
We are we.
Somos nosotros.
We are we. They are. They. I am I. He is he.
Vosotros sois vosotros.
You are you.
Yo soy yo.
I am
Tú eres tú.
me. You are you.
Ella.
She.
Ella estaría siendo ella.
She would be being herself.
Habría sido.
She would have
Ella
been.
habría sido ella.
She would have been herself if if he would have been in that place, she would have been herself. And if she had been there, he would have been himself. But she would have been herself, and she would have been in the place, she would have been herself, and he would have been himself. But she is herself. She is herself, right? She is herself. He would have been herself. You were, they are, they are. They have been. It's been they. She would have seen herself. And they would have been. They would have been. They would have been being. They would have been being themselves. They would have been, it was her. We would have been being ourselves. We are them. Being. To be being. I am being. I am being in a place. I am being myself. I am you. You are you. You are you, and I am myself. They are themselves by being themselves. They are themselves by being themselves, ladies and gentlemen. They are being in a place and they are being who they are. They are being you. You are being them. I have been. I would have been. I would have been you. I would have been her. I would have been him. I would have been they. If you were to have been, if I were her, or if I were to be her, he would have, if he had been me, I would be being him. If being him, I would have been we, and they are being. You were, you were, you were. They are being themselves. She is being herself. It's herself. He is being himself. They are being ourselves. We are being themselves. They have been themselves. They are being in a place and they are being who they are.
Sé tú.
Be yourself. Be yourself. Be who you are. Be who you are. Be who you are. Be yourself. Be who you are. Be yourself. Be who you are. Be ourselves. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias. 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 Gracias.
Thank you.
Ellas. Ellas. Ellas.
They are.
Bueno, pues estamos llegando,
Well,
estamos siendo, pero
we are
sobre todo
being.
si estamos aquí,
If
que
we
estamos
are
aquí,
here,
se lo debemos al
we
somos
owe this
que
to
hace que estemos, que
the
es al
being
instigador de este
somebody and
proyecto,
being in a
a Miguel
place,
Ángel Moratinos, y entonces
to
voy a hacer
Mr.
que
Miguel
esté
Ángel
aquí con
Muratinos, so that
nosotros
I
para
will make him
sentirnos
be
seres
here, so that we
estando juntos
feel human
y
beings
gracias a él,
being together, and
porque sin él
thanks
este proyecto no
to Miguel
existiría.
Ángel, because without him, this project wouldn't exist.
Buen día.
Good morning.
Buenos días. Mil gracias.
Thank you very much.
Privilegio
It's
compartir
a
con todos
privilege
ustedes este
to share
momento,
with all of you
estas
this wonderful
trobades
moment,
camusianas
these
mediterráneas de 3
Camusian
días.
Trovadas in the
Como no
Mediterranean for
se
3
puede ser de
days.
otra manera,
And
agradecer a
with,
todos aquellos
of
que han
course,
hecho
as it wouldn't
posible
be
que este
otherwise,
sueño
thank you
sea
so
realidad.
much for those who've made this amazing dream a
Agradecimiento al
reality.
Ayuntamiento de San
A
Luis, a la
heartfelt
alcaldesa y
thank you
a todo
to
el
Lady
entourage, a todo su
Mayoress,
equipo,
to
como
all
no,
the
a la
team
directora
at the
de Trobades Camus,
town hall
Sandra
of
Monac, Carlos, a
here
todo
in
el
San
equipo,
Luis, Sandra
a mis
Bonac,
compañeros.
Carlos, and all their team. Big round of applause to all of them.
Agradecimiento a
And
los
thank you
traductores que nos
to our
hacen posible
interpreters
entendernos.
who have helped
Agradecimiento a todo
us
el equipo
understand each other.
organizativo.
Thank you to the
Agradecimiento a todos
whole
ustedes, al público,
organizers,
que
and
nos
thank you
vienen,
to you,
que
beloved
cada
audience,
año vienen
being
aquí
so
a
loyal,
Menorca, a
accompanying
San
us
Luis, a
every
estar con
year
nosotros
to
en las
San
trobades.
Luis in
Gracias a
Menorca
todos
to
ustedes
share
por
this
ser
magic
fieles a
together. Thank
este
you for your
iniciativa.
loyalty to this initiative.
Ayer tuvimos un día intenso.
Yesterday, it was an intense day,
Llegué tarde,
and
llegamos tarde
we arrived a little
a
bit late
nuestro hotel.
to our hotel.
Me acosté,
I went to bed, and
viajo mucho,
I
duermo mal,
travel often, I
pero
sleep
esta noche
not very well,
dormí bien,
but last night I did sleep
soñé.
well, and I dreamt.
Y mi sueño empezó
And my dream began
viéndome
by
como una
seeing
sirena
myself as a
que
siren
salía de la
getting
isla del rey.
out of the water in the
Y
King's
luego pasé y
Island.
me encontré
And
que
then I was
visitaba
around
Menorca
and I was
a
visiting
través de las
Menorca
fotografías, ese paraíso
through the photographies,
oculto
that
que yo
hidden
tengo dentro,
paradise and
que es esta
beautiful,
isla de Menorca.
this
Gracias a nuestro buen
island
amigo
of
fotógrafo.
Menorca, thanks to our wonderful
Y
photographer
luego me
friend.
encanté, casi salí a
And
bailar
then I almost went out
con nuestra
dancing to the stage
maravillosa
with
cantante
our beautiful and
aquí, que
wonderful
estuvo
Moroccan singer who made us feel with the Mediterranean North African music. And suddenly I was listening to a serious debate by a psychologist, a professor, some academics, some critical voices on culture. And then I told myself, wow, I am a journalist. I can ask every single question I want in total freedom. How, what an envy. And then I was taken to the cosmos by an astrophysicist who told me that he was discovering new galaxies and how vulnerable and minuscule Mother Earth is. And then I felt some sort of ease or awakening because when we landed from that aerospatial journey, I was an Argelian Palestinian facing horror, tragedy, drama of migration, exile, and this Palestine that hurts and destroys us all, that we have been pushing and pushing constantly so that we lose our humanity. And then I slept again. And when I woke up later, we were submerged in the profound abyss of the oceans. We tried to listen to the noises and music and the water, and we discovered that there is a myriad of plants and sea animals, and then music. I found myself singing to Menorcan melodies. What a great pleasure. Then suddenly I woke up and I asked myself, who are you, Miguel Angel Moratinos? And I was aware that I was a simple, modest, and frustrated Spanish politician. That who, when he was a young man, was involved in politics, who held high dreams and the will to transform life at a small level, at the regional, national, and then international level. Like Camus, I felt the Sisyphus of peace. Every time I traveled to Palestine, I pushed the rock to find a solution, and then always something happened. So the rock fell down again the hill. A frustrated, simple politician, because I understood the complexity of the world. Yes, the complex ways of thinking, like Camus. I knew that it was not easy, but my commitment to improve this world was always alive because I understood that life, as the astrophysicist said, does not belong to Western countries. It does not belong to Europe. We are not even a planet. We're not even a galaxy. We are plenty. Imagine in planet Earth still willing to impose lessons, as we heard this morning, always being the arrogant, egocentric, Eurocentric ones, giving lessons to the rest of the world. I felt encouraged thinking there are still opportunities. This is why we are forging the alliance of civilizations, that everybody thinks, look at this silly idea. That humble politician who woke up yesterday after understanding that there are horrors happening everywhere and confirming that we need to stop war and instaurate peace and using the right words and the right language. Now that militarism, enthusiasm to rearm and to say well, Vix pacem para bellum, if you want peace, prepare war. And I say, no, 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 no. If you want peace, use verbs. The verbs that these artists, that Revenos, have told us, yes, diplomacy makes sense. That frustrated politician, when he woke up this morning, by confirming his status, he felt at ease, he felt enlightened, he felt accompanied by all those wonderful dreams that he witnessed. And after what he's experienced for the last 3 days, he understood that on his own, he wouldn't be able to keep pushing the rock uphill to reach peace. We need each other, each and one of us, as Camus said. We do what we must do. The artist to create, the journalist to criticize or denounce, the philosopher to think, the scientist to imagine, and the politician to try to inject courage in a lost society. So Sandra Monag told us in the Island of the King that we should practice, or at least modify, reimagine, rebuild, or redesign the concept of fraternity. Well, we've done so. We have achieved to do so during these 3 days together. And as a politician, we love to coin terms, ideas, mobilizing us, helping us, or that may help us build a better world. We have the important French three words: liberté, fraternité, freedom, fraternity. And why this dream of the French Revolution has struck us? Why liberty has not been fully lived? Why equality cannot be achieved? Because they have not been able to use fraternity as the linking point between equality and freedom. Pope Francis said a couple of years ago, and I quote by heart, and I kept it precisely to share it with you here today. When Sandra Monag chose the topic fraternity, Pope Francis said, equality is the fruit of being aware of the culture of fraternity, and there shall not be freedom if there is no fraternity, and liberty will be empty and it will be selfish without fraternity. These are words by Pope Francis. He wrote it in the document Human Fraternity as a trial with the great Imam Tayyip Ahmed. This is what we have given each other as experience during these 3 days. We have known how to understand fraternity. We have tried to eliminate colonialism, discrimination, not allowing us to fully embrace fraternity. And above all, what we have managed these 3 days is to embody, to practice, to live and understand fraternity. And this is what sheds strength upon us. Now I will be able to hold back my stick as a pilgrim to walk around the world sharing my will for peace, and I promise tomorrow I'll come back again with even more strength. And what I would kindly ask you is that each and one of us be capable of not remaining only in these 3 days, as the Palestine architect said, Sandy, that are the ones for the guests to stay in your home. We got to be back here with a commitment towards this fraternal feeling that we've experienced. We have committed ourselves to defend it, and we want it to be our northern star. We are far outnumbering them of those who don't want fraternity, who don't want peace, who don't want freedom and equality and joy. We are far more, but we don't know how to mobilize collectively. And what we gotta do is to come back again and recover these principles, these values, this will to together try to keep following the message. I repeat it every year in the conclusions of these Camusian Trobades. When he was granted the Literature Nobel Prize, Camus, in his speech, said the famous paragraph, all generations are born fully convinced that they should change the world, but I will have one, but I'll have yet a bigger task, the world not to collapse. And it should not collapse. It is not going to happen if we all do our duty. Long life to the Camusian Truadas. Thank you very much and welcome again to Menorca and San Luis.
Bueno, pues estamos llegando a nuestro
Well, we are coming to the end of this 10th edition. We have been a family, we are a family, and family is also who will be accompanying us. I am talking about this music duo, Tana and Mama Fiera. Mama Fiera is part of this family, so is Tania, but up to now behind the stage, and we have requested them to be with us to conclude these 3 days because their proposal turns around the idea that it wouldn't fit any better with what we've experienced these 3 days. The rebellion of tenderness, this rebellion that doesn't shout, but rather it touches, it doesn't convince, but it rather unites. Pluma, feather, understands poetry as that meeting place and art as that space capable of generating empathy, listening, and bond. This show, it's a surprise even for me, is not a closing act. It's only the distillation of what we've debated, felt, shared, witnessed during these 3 days. Without a day, Pluma will transform it into something that we will be able to take back home with us. Thank you, Tania, Mama Fiera, and Sandra. You have the floor. Thank you.
Són tan meravelloses les ballenes. I jo sempre he pensat que su canto podría ser
That their song
como el sonido del dolor
could be
sanándose.
like
Esta canción se
the
llama Canto de
sound
ballenas.
that is actually curing you. A healing sound. This song is called Whales.
Arrancarse palabra a las pocas verdades que quedan. Sentir que late un abismo bajo tus pies. Columpiarse en los quizás o tal vez fuera. Si moviera al menos ficha por esta vez. Levantarse con la certeza de que se va a caer. La rodilla morada de tanto golpe sin fe. El invierno que cruza mi mano de dedo a dedo. Arder los puntos cardinales y quedar solo el miedo. Y bajo mis huellas no habitar ni sendero. Sentirse siempre, empezar siempre en punto cero. Pero aparece al fin mi mirada en el espejo, me guiña un ojo y me dice. Pero aparece al fin mi mirada en el espejo, me guiña un ojo y me dice
que miramos más afuera de lo que escuchamos dentro. Dime dónde está el origen del movimiento, que hay que sacarse cuentos para echarnos cuenta que este mundo hay que pelarlo para quitarle las vergüenzas. Y es que somos mucho más de lo que se puede nombrar. Un mar de fueguitos, aprendiendo a navegar, combatiendo con poesía cada frontera. La belleza no solo se viste de primaveras.
Salir a la calle, una sonrisa al aire, ver brillo en las caras, invitarlas al baile. Escarcha en el pelo, pero acabarse los pelos. El frío es perfecto para arrancar el vuelo. Canto de ballenas en el horizonte. Empecemos a andar aunque no tengamos norte.
El horizonte sirve
llegó.
Estás a tiempo de encontrar tu lugar. No necesitas permiso para soñar. Nada cambia si yo no cambio.
Canto de ballenas en el horizonte. Empecemos a andar aunque no tengamos norte. Empecemos a andar aunque no tengamos norte. Que los llantos que atrapan por la noche sirvan para dar aliento. No olvidar que la fuerza que a veces está lejos está siempre dentro. Que lata el pulso de la vida y que no nos venza la muerte. La belleza es un abrazo, hoguera de leña que llega cuando menos te lo esperas. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Es un auténtico placer.
Thank you so much. It's a true pleasure for us to be here. The fact of being here in the Trobades is the poetic connection that is being created. Sandra, thank you for counting on me, with counting with me, and also thank you for counting on Tanya too. Are you happy? Yes, very, very happy, very excited. How many things and how much life. And Sandra, you were right when you said at the opening that this was not only a show, sharing ideas, a discussion. It was about living an experience, and that's what it's been. And this is how we have felt it. Cristina Fernandez, Cubas, you were saying yesterday that stories are a mystery. So let's start. Let's the mystery start. So one day the sea will come to tell us what it expects of us. And I see you and I feel you with my hands, and I see your hands full of white carnations laden with intentions. With the company La Soledad, we felt that water resembles poetry. Here from the rivers of paradise, hey David? Now, today, we have discovered that Aita is the language of love, a love in rebellion. Water doesn't ask which shore it belongs to, so he's going to see what it has brought us. Everything is connected in an invisible way. The images she brings us from the CRI Futaki's way of inviting us back to the beginning. Underwater, everything is presence. The noise is outside. There is no time to think. Entering the sea is like entering someone else's home. One must do it with respect, listening and caring. To coexist is to be part of the environment, not own it, not become its owners.
El mar suena y cómo
the sea makes a sound. And how does it sound? Michel André was telling us about this. Silence is part of its language. The planet demands that we listen to it. Part of our living world, and dignity begins with knowing that we are not alone on this planet.
La piel no decide separarse del mundo.
The skin does not choose to separate itself from the world. Cynthia Fleury told us we have lost the presence of the other. It is necessary to place vulnerability at the center. Vulnerability is nourishment. an agent of transformation. It is what unites us in a universal network.
Todavía encara de ayer, la tarda, puedo sentir el eléctrico de las plantas.
I can still feel the electricity of plants. Mohamed Mourisha shared his projects and talked about a garden as a space of emergence, where others saw emptiness, but bodies, voices, and connections continue to emerge. He said that on the peripheries, far from the center of the narrative, continue offering silent forms of life. Let us grasp these words whole and hold them close to our hearts. Keep these words close to our hearts. Perhaps the heartbeat could be our path back. Can I ask you for a favor? Listen to your heartbeat. Can you represent your heartbeat?
Como la luz en la sombra, como un río con sal, como aquello que no se nombra, como se pone a bailar, aunque no te vea. Te veo venir, como la primavera que llega y me estampa todo el jardín, aunque no te vea.
¿Cómo podemos crear una comunidad invisible más allá de la materia, de los cuerpos próximos? Se preguntaba Antonio Monegal. Este encuentro es un compromiso con la utopía. Es una promesa en el horizonte. Lina Sowalem nos presentó a su padre, el mimo Susu, un personaje capaz de crear un territorio imaginario más allá de las fronteras, un exilio interior, donde el silencio es una forma de encontrar su voz en el mundo y la risa, su mejor arma de resistencia. Lo invisible trabaja más allá de los nombres, de lo conocido. Alain Doreso-Miram nos contaba que cuando descubrimos otros mundos, nos damos cuenta de que no somos el centro ni la medida. La fraternidad también es otorgarle dignidad a lo distinto. Tomamos estas palabras y las guardamos en el cuerpo.
Carry them in our bodies.
Aunque no te vea, te veo venir, como la primavera que llega y me estampa todo, ta, 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 ta. Muchas gracias.
Solo el miedo escribe.
Only fear draws borders that segregate us. Only fear turns the heartbeat of somebody else into a threat. Lauren Boykas reminded us of the Ubuntu philosophy, I am because we are, making us reflect on how fear, oppression, and fascism erode precisely that which connects us to others.
¿Acaso una flor puede oler a sangre?
Can a flower smell of blood? Mohamed Al-Haq, Incipiens, Premis Incipiens, winner this year, explained to us yesterday that lavender is the title of his photographic work is the name of the artificial intelligence the Israeli army uses to collect data on Gazans. He claims that their lists contain the names of over 30,000 people they consider dangerous, and they choose the most intimate family moment of the day to kill, following a model they call Where's That?
Me sobran las sombras colgadas como ecos de aquello que ya yo perdí. Me faltan renglones y andamios y grietas sobre lo que es construir. Quisiera vencer sin romper mi paz, poder sostener lo que ya no está. Camino sin suelo, mi manto es un cielo que por más que me alce no puedo alcanzar. Tengo un mundo chiquito que me atrapa el cuerpo, que me deja muda y no puedo avanzar. Mi piel se estrecha, camino entre brechas y quiero escapar. Pero eterno es el miedo cuando se negocia lo que es esencial, cuando ahoga la soga de ciertos cobardes que todo lo quieren devorar.
Vull que marxi aquesta por, vestir-la de matinada i abraçar-me fort al cor. Fort al cor, que els meus morts dins meu hi són, que els meus morts dins meu hi són. Vull que marxi aquesta por, aquesta por.
Y no quiero más, quisiera saber cómo respirar sin
aquesta por,
que me ata las manos, que me ahogan las ganas y todo este temblor
aquesta
que me encierra dentro de mí. No quiero seguir con
aquesta por,
que me impide ver con el corazón.
Miedo, 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 que marxi.
Miedo, fuera, fuera, fuera.
Aquesta por que ve, un monstre i ens atrapa i ens escanya amb una mà, amb la mà del capital. Aquesta por tan cruel, tan cruenta i tan ferotge com la por de no saber si menjarem demà. Aquesta maldició de viure una nit eterna, por de no despertar més o quedar dormits per sempre, por de tanta soledat, de violència o tanta guerra, del feixisme blanquejat, de la por com a estratègia de quedar-nos al carrer sense sostre ni vivenda, tenir por del teu veí, fer de l'odi la bandera, por d'aquesta humanitat que ha perdut tota memòria i repeteix sense parar el pitjor d'aquesta història. Vull que marxi aquesta por, vestir-la de matinada i abraçar-me fort al cor. Fort al cor, que els meus morts dins meu hi són, que els meus morts dins meu hi són. Vull que marxi aquesta por, aquesta por.
No pueden querrán quitarnos los besos, los sueños, abrazos mañana, silencio, los vientos, las manos que calman, el baile y los cuerpos son nuestros, los muertos que arrancan sin alma, que caigan sus muros, que caigan, que avancen los pasos con fuerza y la rabia, que arda en gargantas, que tumbe sus trampas, que no enmudezcan las voces que cantan.
Vull que marxi aquesta por, vestir-la de matinada i abraçar-me fort al cor, fort al cor. Moltes gràcies. Merci. Cada madrugada, cuando va al trabajo,
Every morning, when he goes to work, he encounters a different end of the world. And he's got an enormous task to tell us about it. I don't know how he manages that. Sastre filled the room with questions. He filled us with questions. Who are we? What do we want to do? What is rebellion? And he said, rebellion begins when a no manifests itself, a no that overwhelms us. Rebellion does not need to shout. The shout is not heard. Perhaps it has more to do with stopping time, enjoying after dinner chats, for example. Sastre refuses to give up joy. Joy is revolutionary. And he ended up saying, rebellion needs our joy.
No sé dónde está Sastre.
¿Sabe lo que les pasa a las personas cuando están tan
Do you know what
juntas?
happens to people when they are so close that they cannot see each other? What happens? Well, they become a mass. And that is when I say to myself that there is a code for those who tell themselves intelligent.
Rebelarse contra el dirigente intransigente, ser nuestro propio regente, escapar de lo convergente sin agentes astringentes, pero nos volvemos exigentes, negligentes en lugar de indulgentes y tampoco diligentes, que resulta contingente repetirnos. Aquí lo que sobra es gente. Es que la gente está muy loca. La gente no atiende razón. La gente no sabe callarse la boca y hacen bullying sin compasión. La gente abulta. La gente es hater y se suman al mogollón. La gente no ayuda, es egoísta y le gusta el reggaetón. La gente miente, se contradice y encima se empeñan en llevar su
People
opinión.
tell lies. They contradict each other and they always think they're right. People are idiots. That's what my grandmother said. People are the worst and the people are guilty. It's their fault because people are bad, evil people, but not me. Before being absorbed by this contradiction, I try to turn the focus on the topic I want to discuss. And from far away, this cannot be seen. The dust, the broken part, the gap, The tremor in each voice, beliefs, failures, caresses cannot be seen. How can we delete the print with a word in many mouths and in no mouth? How to simplify the guilt? Because it's a word that is not big enough, the innocence of who's born. But this blindness is persistent, trying to control outside what we may not control within ourselves. Because from far away, we cannot see that. And turning the focus will allow us to play with mirrors, to combat with a whisper, a shout, not to forget that under so many discourses, there are incredibly beautiful people. We talk too little about.
I aquí s'ha trencat tantes vegades que dels seus trossos n'ha fet un jardí. N'hi ha qui fa el que sent encara que li tremoli l'endins. Hi ha àvies assegudes a qualsevol banc i quan et veuen et pregunten hola, què tal? Hi ha orenetes que sempre tornen i et fan sentir que tot s'hi val. I és que veig tanta bellesa, tot i aquest món tan trencat. I és que veig tanta bellesa, tot i aquest món tan trencat. Tot i aquest món. Ara estamos.
This is us. To give. It means dar in Arabic, home. Our floor is trembling. The human nature, constantly moving, forces us to think of the common, the square, the meeting place. The refugee camp is a symbol both in architecture, in political and humanitarian crisis. Today, they have confessed that even though the sense of failure does not impede them using art the way we all should.
Anne Pourtot
shared Camus' voice when she said that the true generosity towards future is living with our two hands fully full of our present. Maybe the we is not so much thought, but done, like Nana and the choir managing to feel their music right into our bodies. You said that collective song understands us to understand our place so that whatever we build together will stand forever. Now we will hold your testimony to keep building together, and we shall do it so that this sea that we have swum together will take place and it'll sing to us. We want those waves, this music to follow us. Please think. Only one word. Think. When you think about fraternity, what is the first word that comes to your mind? Like in a sea, there will be a wave from the horizon down to the stage. So people in the last row will launch the wave. You gotta whisper the word you've thought about to the person in front of you, in the row in front of you. And you need to remember all the words. They will be accumulating down to the first row. We don't know what's going to happen. Some, let's say 4 people below your seat, you have a little board with a pen. It's a blue little card. Let's see who has it. It's near the leg, near the... No, not on the last row. It's a little bit far. In the 4 or 5th first lines. Have you found any? Thank you. Okay, yes. One? Only one? There was another one somewhere here. Beneath the seats, it's a blue card. If not, all the weight of those waves will be onto that person's. Oh, another one. Out of the blue. Oh, we didn't know it. We didn't know it. It was out of chance.
Si no dejamos estas dos.
Solo hay dos, hay tres.
Ah, 3, 4. Ah, perfecto.
3, 4. We have them? Great. Okay. You are the messengers, right? When the waves and the whispering comes into your ears, please write down as many words as you can remember. And then you will bring them to our seashore. Okay? Have you understood the technique? Okay, brilliant. So let's go for it. Let the wave begin.
Estem fetes de fragments.
We are made of fragments that wash over us like a wave, like water coming together again. 10 years of Trobades, a wave that brings new messages from the same waters, reminding us that fraternity can be sharing, love, union, friendship, love, tenderness, humanity, empathy, more joy, the sea, solidarity, peace, happiness, wave, live, feeling love, humanity, richness, brotherhood and sisterhood, peace, family, integrating, being together, community. I want to return to the sea where the sun blurs the boundary of our skin as we swim together. As nothing is never fully concluded, I rebel, therefore we are. Albert Camus, thank you very much. Thank you.
No, por favor, si os podéis quedar, que para nosotros es muy
Could you stay? Because for us it's truly important as we are and we have been, and I hope that we will keep being. We need you to understand who we are.
Y somos pues unos cuantos.
We are a
Y
few.
este para mí es el momento
And for
fundamental. Me
this,
habéis visto
this
a
is
mí,
the key
pero
moment. You have
somos
seen
muchos,
me, but we are
gente muy importante de
plenty
esta
and
familia.
very important members of this big projects
Así
family.
que voy a ir llamando a
So
cada una de
I
las
will
personas que me
call
acompañan a lo
each
largo de
and
estos meses.
one of us accompanying us throughout these months.
Carlos.
Carlos,
Segundo.
my shadow, my colleague.
Directora de arte.
Nerea, my designer, art director, friend.
A mi equipo de prensa, Javier.
My press team.
A Ana Gómez de las redes.
Anna from social networks.
Fotógrafo, David.
Our photographer, David.
A Luis. Nuestros vídeos, Sergio.
Luis, our videos.
Nuestra web, Jordi.
Sergio, our website, Jordi.
Nuestros editores y
our editors and proofreaders, translators, our simultaneous interpreters who are not here with us, Francis, Merino, Cristina, Francis, Freddy, Susana, Violeta, Francesca, our drivers, our production colleagues, Maria, the Incipient Awards coordinators, Xavier and Fanny, Gafur and Hammam, who helped us so much, the town hall team from San Luis, Virginia and Mercedes, helping us along the year, our bookkeeper, Susana, and of course, Loles, our Lady Mayoress, and the producer of this Utopia, Miguel Angel Moratinos. Thank you all. Thank you. And as we need to keep believing, I truly hope that we shall meet again next year. And acoustic, our audiovisual colleagues, Roger, Fer, Santi, and all the team here, Leo, and with this latest message, I invite you to come again in 2027 to celebrate our 10th years, 10 years together.